The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of Red Hollow's general store, kicking up a cloud of dust that settled over everything like a dirty blanket. Mara Vance climbed down slowly, her boots hitting the ground with a solid thud that made the driver glance back nervously. She didn't acknowledge him, didn't thank him for the ride or apologize for the way the coach had sagged under her weight for the last 50 miles. She just pulled her trunk from the back, set it in the dirt, and stood there, taking in the town that would either make her or finish what the rest of the world had started. Red Hollow wasn't much to look at. A single dirt road cutting through a handful of weathered buildings, all leaning slightly to one side like they were too tired to stand up straight. The saloon, the general store, a livery stable that smelled like manure and hopelessness. And everywhere, dust. It coated the windows, the boardwalks, the faces of the men who stopped what they were doing to stare at her. Mara was used to stares. She'd been getting them her whole life. She was a big woman, not tall, but broad in a way that made people uncomfortable. Her arms were thick, her hands calloused and scarred from years of work. Her dress was plain, faded blue cotton that had been mended more times than she could count, and her hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it gave her a headache. But she didn't loosen it. Pain was just another thing you got used to. A man in a stained apron stepped out of the general store, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked her up and down, his expression shifting from curiosity to something harder. "Help you, ma'am?" "I'm looking for the Rourke Ranch," Mara said. Her voice was flat, uninflected. She'd learned a long time ago not to put emotion into her words. People took emotion as weakness. The man's eyebrows went up. "Rourke Ranch? That's about 10 miles north. What business you got out there?" "That's my concern." His jaw tightened. "Listen, lady, I don't know what you heard, but Caleb Rourke don't hire—" "I didn't ask for a history lesson," Mara interrupted. "I asked for directions." A few of the men standing nearby chuckled, but it wasn't friendly laughter. It was the kind of sound people made when they were watching someone walk into a trap. The shopkeeper pointed up the road. "Follow the trail north till you hit the fork. Take the left branch. You'll know it when you see it." Mara nodded once, picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing, and started walking. Behind her, she heard one of the men mutter, "She won't last a day." Another voice, younger, meaner, "Hell, I'd give her an hour." More laughter. Mara didn't turn around. She'd heard worse. The walk to the Rourke Ranch took her 3 hours. The sun was brutal, beating down on the back of her neck until her dress was soaked through with sweat. Her arms ached from carrying the trunk, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling, and feeling was the one thing she couldn't afford. So she walked. The ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a sprawling collection of barns, corrals, and bunkhouses clustered around a main house that looked like it had been built to withstand a siege. Cattle dotted the fields in the distance, and the smell of dust and livestock hung heavy in the air. Mara walked straight up to the main house and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a man in his late 30s with hard eyes and a harder jaw. He was tall, lean, dressed in work clothes that had seen better days. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples, and when he looked at her, his expression didn't change. "You lost?" he asked. "Are you Caleb Rourke?" "I am." "I'm here about the cook job." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then, slowly, something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "That right?" "That's right." "You got experience?" 10 years in a logging camp up north, fed crews of 40 men, sometimes more. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, 7 days a week. Rourke leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Logging camp's different than a ranch. Food's food. Men are men. My men are harder than loggers." "Then they'll appreciate a good meal even more." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze traveling over her in a way that made most women flinch. But Mara didn't flinch. She met his eyes and waited. Finally, Rourke straightened up. "I got 30 men working this ranch. They eat like they've been starved their whole lives. Breakfast at 5, lunch at noon, dinner at 7. You miss a meal, you're done. You serve something that makes them sick, you're done. You can't keep up, you're done. Understood?" "Understood." "Pays $30 a month, room and board included. You get Sundays off after lunch service." "Fine. You start tomorrow." Mara nodded. "Where's the kitchen?" Rourke pointed to a building behind the main house. a long, low structure with a chimney poking out of the roof. That's the cookhouse, bunk room for the cooks attached to the back. You'll find everything you need inside. What about supplies? Pantry's stocked. If you need something, make a list and give it to my foreman. He'll get it next time someone goes into town. Who was the last cook? Something shifted in Rourke's expression. Just a flicker, there and gone. Doesn't matter. He's not here anymore. Mara didn't press. She picked up her trunk and started toward the cookhouse. Hey, Rourke called after her. She stopped, looked back. What's your name? Mara Vance. Well, Miss Vance, I'll give you 1 week. If you're still standing after that, we'll talk about keeping you on permanent. I'll be standing, Mara said. Rourke's mouth twitched, almost like he wanted to smile. But he didn't. He just turned and walked back into the house, closing the door behind him. Son, the cookhouse was worse than Mara had expected, and she'd expected it to be bad. The main room was dominated by a massive iron stove that looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Grease coated the surface, and the oven door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. The walls were stained with smoke and God knew what else, and the floor was covered in a layer of grime that crunched under her boots. 2 long wooden tables ran the length of the room, scarred and gouged from years of abuse. Benches lined either side, most of them wobbling on uneven legs. The pantry was a small room off to the side, shelves stocked with sacks of flour, cornmeal, beans, and salt pork. There were a few jars of preserves, some onions, a crate of potatoes starting to sprout. Not much to work with, but Mara had worked with less. The bunk room in the back was barely big enough for a narrow bed and a small trunk. The mattress was thin, the blanket rough, and there was a single window that didn't quite close all the way. It would be cold in the winter, hot in the summer, miserable year-round. Perfect. Mara set her trunk down, opened it, and pulled out the one thing she'd carried with her through every bad job, every terrible town, every moment when she'd wanted to quit. Her cast-iron skillet. It was old, heavy, seasoned to a deep black from years of use. Her mother had given it to her when she was 16, right before Mara had left home for the first time. Take care of this, her mother had said, and it'll take care of you. Mara ran her hand over the smooth surface, then set it on the stove. She had work to do. Tip. By the time the sun set, Mara had scrubbed the stove until her hands were raw, swept the floor, wiped down the tables, and inventoried every item in the pantry. She'd found a spare apron hanging on a nail, stained and frayed, but it would do, and she'd located the knives, the pots, the serving dishes. Everything was ready. She just had to survive the first meal. Johnson. The ranch hands started filing into the cookhouse at 5 the next morning, stomping in with mud on their boots and exhaustion in their eyes. They were a rough-looking bunch, lean, sun-scorched men with hard faces and harder hands. They sat down at the tables without a word, waiting. Mara didn't introduce herself, didn't smile, didn't try to win them over. She just started serving. Biscuits, bacon, scrambled eggs, fried potatoes, strong coffee, simple, hot, filling. She moved through this room like a machine, setting plates down in front of each man, refilling coffee cups, clearing empty dishes. She didn't make eye contact, didn't linger, just worked. The men ate in silence, shoveling food into their mouths like they were afraid it would disappear. A few of them glanced at her when they thought she wasn't looking, but none of them spoke. When the last man finished, Mara cleared the tables, washed the dishes, and started preparing for lunch. It was only after the cookhouse emptied that she allowed herself to sit down, just for a moment, her hands shaking from the effort of holding herself together. She'd made it through one meal. 29 more to go before the week was up. By the third day, the whispers started. Mara heard them when she walked past the bunkhouses, when she went to the well for water, when she passed the men working in the corrals. She's too slow. Food's decent, but she won't last. Rourke's gonna fire her by the end of the week. She didn't react, didn't defend herself, just kept her head down and kept working. On the fourth day, one of the younger hands, a kid named Tommy with a face full of freckles and a mouth that ran faster than his brain, decided to test her. "Hey, cook!" he called out during breakfast, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This bacon's burnt." Mara looked at him. The bacon wasn't burnt. It was crispy, exactly the way most of the men liked it. "Then don't eat it," she said. Tommy grinned, encouraged by the snickers from the other men. Maybe you should spend less time sitting on your ass and more time watching the stove. The room went quiet. Mara set down the coffee pot she'd been holding and walked over to Tommy's table. She didn't hurry, didn't rush, just moved with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who had all the time in the world. She stopped in front of him, looked down at his plate, then looked at him. "You got two choices," she said. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. "You can finish your breakfast and shut your mouth, or you can get out of my cookhouse and don't come back." Tommy's grin faltered. "You can't—" "I can," Mara interrupted. "This is my kitchen. You don't like how I run it. You're welcome to cook your own meals." For a moment, she thought he might push back, might say something stupid and force her to make good on the threat. But then one of the older hands, a grizzled man with a scar running down his cheek, spoke up. "Sit down and eat, Tommy. You're embarrassing yourself." Tommy's face flushed red, but he didn't argue. He picked up his fork and started eating, his eyes fixed on his plate. Mara turned and walked back to the stove. Behind her, she heard someone mutter, "Damn." Shuss. That night, as Mara was cleaning up after dinner, the door to the cookhouse opened and Caleb Rourke walked in. She didn't stop working, just kept scrubbing the pot she'd been working on, her hands moving in steady, practiced circles. "You handled Tommy well," Rourke said. "He's a kid. Kids need boundaries. Most cooks would have let it slide. Most cooks don't last." Rourke leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You planning on lasting? That's the idea. Why?" Mara paused, just for a second, then went back to scrubbing. "Because I need the job." "That's it?" "That's enough." Rourke was quiet for a moment, then, "The men are talking." "I know. They think you're too slow, too soft. I know that too." "You gonna prove them wrong?" Mara set the pot down, dried her hands on her apron, and turned to face him. "I don't have to prove anything to them. I just have to do my job." Rourke's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Respect, maybe? Or curiosity. "Fair enough," he said. He straightened up, started to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, the food's good. Better than anything we've had in a long time." "Thanks." He nodded once and walked out, leaving Mara alone in the cookhouse. She stood there for a moment, staring at the door, then turned back to the dishes. 1 week down. The rest of her life to go. The days blurred together after that. Wake up before dawn, start the fires, prepare breakfast, serve, clean, prepare lunch, serve, clean, prepare dinner, serve, clean, collapse into bed and do it all over again the next day. It was brutal, relentless work that left her exhausted to the bone. But Mara didn't complain, didn't slow down, didn't give anyone a reason to doubt her. The men stopped whispering, stopped watching her like they expected her to fail. They just ate, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, something started to shift. Tommy stopped making smart remarks, started saying thank you when she refilled his coffee. The older hands nodded to her when they came in for meals. A few of them even complimented the food. And Rourke stopped checking on her every day, stopped looking at her like she was a problem waiting to happen. He just let her work. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara felt something close to stable. It wouldn't last, she knew that. Stability never lasted. But for now, it was enough. The storm hit on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after Mara had started at the ranch. She'd been cleaning up after dinner when the first gust of wind rattled the windows, strong enough to make the walls creak. She looked up, frowning, and walked to the door. The sky was black, roiling with clouds that moved like something alive. Lightning flickered in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the ground. Mara had seen storms before, lived through more than her share of them, but something about this one felt different, felt wrong. She closed the door, locked it, and went to bed. By midnight, the storm was a living thing, howling and screaming around the cookhouse like it wanted to tear the building apart. Rain hammered the roof in sheets, and the wind was so strong it found every gap, every crack, whistling through the walls in a sound that made Mara's teeth ache. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. And then, over the sound of the storm, she heard something else. Shouting. Mara sat up, pulled on her boots, and grabbed her coat. She stepped out into the storm and was immediately hit by a wall of wind and rain that nearly knocked her off her feet. She grabbed the door frame, steadied herself, and looked toward the sound of the voices. Men were running toward the main barn, their lanterns swinging wildly in the wind. Mara ran after them. Inside the barn, chaos. The roof had partially collapsed, and rain was pouring in through the hole, flooding the floor. Horses screamed and kicked in their stalls, terrified by the noise and the water. The men were trying to get them out, but the animals were panicking, refusing to move. "Get back!" someone yelled. "The whole thing's coming down!" Mara didn't think. She just moved. She waded into the water, grabbed the nearest horse by the halter, and pulled. The animal resisted, eyes rolling white with fear, but Mara held on, her voice low and steady. "Easy, easy now. Come on." The horse took a step, then another. Mara led it out of the barn, handed it off to one of the men, and went back for another. She did this 5 times, 6, 7. By the time the last horse was out, the barn's roof groaned, shifted, and collapsed entirely, crashing down in a shower of splintered wood and debris. Mara stood in the rain, soaked to the bone, her lungs burning, and watched it fall. One of the men, she thought it might have been the foreman, clapped her on the shoulder. "Hell of a thing you just did, ma'am." Mara didn't answer. She was too tired. She just turned and walked back to the cookhouse, leaving wet footprints in the mud. The next morning, the ranch was a disaster. The barn was gone. Half the fencing was down. The supply shed had been blown over, scattering tools and equipment across the yard. And worst of all, the wagon that had been scheduled to bring supplies from town had sent word. Roads were washed out. Nothing was getting through for at least a week. Mara stood in the pantry, staring at the dwindling supplies, and did the math. They had enough food for maybe 3 days, 4 if she stretched it. After that, they'd be eating scraps. She walked to the main house and knocked. Rourke answered, looking like he hadn't slept. "What is it?" "We're going to run out of food." "I know. I can make it last a few more days, but after that—" "I know," Rourke said again, sharper this time. "I'm working on it." "What if I went into town?" Rourke stared at her. "What?" "I could take a horse, go into town, buy supplies, bring them back. The roads are washed out. Then I'll go around them. It's a 2-day ride in good weather. In this, you'd be lucky to make it in 4. Then I'll make it in 4. Rourke shook his head. "No, it's too dangerous. More dangerous than starving. You don't know the territory. You'd get lost, or worse." Mara met his eyes. "I'm going." "The hell you are." "I'm not sending—" "You're not sending me," Mara interrupted. "I'm going. You can help me or you can get out of my way." For a long moment, they just stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Rourke exhaled, long and slow. "You're insane." "Maybe." He rubbed his face, looked away, then looked back. "Fine. But you're taking one of the men with you." "No." "Mara, I work alone." Rourke's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just turned, walked into the house, and came back a minute later with a map and a rifle. "Stay on the trail as much as you can," he said, spreading the map out on the porch. "If you hit the river, you've gone too far east. There's a trading post about halfway. Here, you can rest there if you need to." Mara studied the map, committing it to memory. "Take the rifle," Rourke said, "and don't be stupid." Mara took the rifle, slung it over her shoulder, and started toward the stable. "Mara." She stopped, looked back. Rourke's expression was unreadable. "Come back." She didn't answer, just turned and kept walking. The journey was every bit as brutal as Rourke had warned. The horse, a sturdy mare named Bess, handled the terrain better than Mara expected, but the going was slow. Mud sucked at the horse's hooves, and fallen trees blocked the trail in more than one place, forcing Mara to dismount and lead Bess around them. It rained on and off for the first day, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked through her coat and left her shivering. She didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Every hour she wasted was an hour the ranch went without food. She reached the trading post just after dark, a squat little building that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. The owner, a wiry old man with a suspicious squint, let her sleep in the back room for $2. She was back on the trail before dawn. The second day was worse. The rain stopped, but the sun came out, turning the mud into a thick, clinging mess that made every step a fight. Bess started limping around midday, and Mara had to stop, check her hooves, dig out a stone that had wedged itself in. They kept moving. By the time Red Hollow came into view, Mara's hands were blistered, her legs ached, and she was so tired she could barely think straight. But she'd made it. She bought supplies: flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, everything she could carry, loaded them onto Bess, and started the journey back. It took her 3 days. When she finally rode into the ranch, half dead and covered in mud, the men came out of the bunkhouses to stare. Rourke was standing on the porch of the main house. He didn't say anything, just watched as Mara dismounted, untied the supplies, and started carrying them into the cookhouse. She made 4 trips. On the 5th, her legs gave out, and she collapsed in the dirt. 2 of the men rushed over, helped her up, carried her inside. Rourke followed. "Get her some water," he said, "and a blanket." Mara tried to protest, but her voice wouldn't work. She just sat there, shaking, while someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and pressed a cup of water into her hands. "You're an idiot," Rourke said. Mara managed a weak smile. "I know. You could have died out there, but I didn't." Rourke shook his head, but there was something in his expression that hadn't been there before, something that looked almost like admiration. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll handle dinner tonight." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to say she could do it. She was fine. She didn't need help. But the words wouldn't come, so she just nodded and let them take her to her bunk. She was asleep before her head hit the pillow. Mara woke to the smell of burning coffee and the sound of men arguing. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache, and her hands were wrapped in bandages she didn't remember putting on. Then it all came rushing back, the journey, the supplies, collapsing in the dirt like a fool. She sat up too fast and immediately regretted it. The room spun, and she had to grip the edge of the bed to keep from falling over. The voices outside got louder. Mara forced herself to stand, ignoring the protests from every muscle in her body, and walked to the door. She opened it just enough to see into the main cookhouse. 3 of the younger ranch hands were standing around the stove, staring at a pot of what might have been coffee but looked more like tar. One of them, she thought his name was Marcus, was holding a wooden spoon like it was a weapon he didn't know how to use. "I'm telling you, you use too much," another one said. "I use the same amount she uses." "Well, it tastes like dirt." "Then you make it." Mara pushed the door open wider. All 3 men jumped like they'd been caught stealing. "Out," she said. Marcus set the spoon down so fast it clattered against the stove. "We were just trying to help." "I know. Out." They filed past her, heads down, looking like kids who'd been scolded by their mother. Mara waited until they were gone, then walked over to the stove and looked at the pot. It was worse than dirt. It was undrinkable. She dumped it, started fresh, and had a proper pot brewing by the time the first men started showing up for breakfast. Nobody said anything about her being up. Nobody told her to rest. They just sat down at the tables and waited, same as always. Mara served them biscuits and gravy, fried eggs, bogs, bacon that was crispy but not burnt. The food wasn't fancy, but it was hot, and there was plenty of it, and that was all that mattered. She moved through the room on autopilot, her body going through the motions, even though her brain felt like it was wrapped in cotton. Refill coffee, clear plates, wipe down tables. Don't think. Don't stop. Just work. It wasn't until the last man left that she allowed herself to sit down. Her hands were shaking again. Not from exhaustion this time. From something else. Something that felt dangerously close to pride. She'd done it. She'd gone into hostile territory, bought supplies, and made it back alive. She'd saved the ranch from going hungry. And nobody had thanked her. Nobody except Rourke in his own gruff way. And even that had been more of an insult than a compliment. Mara told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't need thanks, didn't need recognition. But the lie tasted bitter. She stood up, cleared her own plate, and got back to work. The men came in for lunch right on time. Mara served stew, beef and vegetables in a thick broth that stuck to your ribs. She'd made cornbread to go with it, golden and crumbly, still warm from the oven. The men ate without talking, shoveling food into their mouths like they were afraid someone would take it away. Mara had seen it before, in the logging camps. Men who'd grown up hungry never really stopped being hungry, even when there was plenty. She was refilling coffee when she heard the door open behind her. She didn't turn around. Didn't need to. She could feel the shift in the room, the way the men's postures changed, going just a little bit straighter. Caleb Rourke walked in, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He didn't sit down, just stood near the door, arms crossed, watching. Mara finished pouring coffee and walked back to the stove. "You should still be in bed," Rourke said. "I'm fine." "You collapsed yesterday." "I'm fine now." Rourke was quiet for a moment, then, "We need to talk when you're done here." Mara nodded, but didn't look at him. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her back, could sense the men at the tables listening even though they pretended not to. Rourke left without another word. Mara finished serving lunch, cleaned up, and walked to the main house. She knocked once and waited. Rourke opened the door. "Come in." The inside of the house was sparse. Functional furniture, bare walls, nothing that suggested a woman had ever lived there. Rourke led her to a small office at the back, gestured to a chair. Mara sat. Rourke leaned against his desk, arms still crossed. "You planning on pulling another stunt like that?" "If I have to." "You don't have to. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You're the cook, not a supply runner." "Someone had to do it. Not you." Mara met his eyes. "Who else was going to go? Your men are needed here. You can't leave the ranch. I was the only option." "You could have died." "But I didn't." Rourke's jaw tightened. "You're missing the point." "No, you're missing the point." Mara's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "I did what needed to be done. That's my job. Keeping these men fed. If that means riding into town through a storm, then that's what I do. Your job is to cook, not to— My job is whatever it needs to be to keep this place running." Mara stood up. "Now, if that's all, I need to start on dinner." She turned to leave. "Wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. Rourke exhaled, slow and deliberate. "The men are talking about what you did." "Let them talk. They're saying you're tougher than half the crew." "Good." "It's making some of them uncomfortable." Now Mara did turn around. "Uncomfortable how?" Rourke hesitated, and in that hesitation, Mara saw something she hadn't expected. He was trying to protect her, not from danger, from gossip. "Some of them think you're trying to prove something," he said finally, "that you're working too hard because you think you don't belong." "I don't belong," Mara said flatly. "I'm a woman in a man's world, doing a man's job, and half your crew would rather see me fail than succeed. So yeah, I'm working hard, because if I don't, they'll use any excuse to get rid of me." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Rourke didn't answer, because they both knew it was. Mara walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the knob. "I appreciate the concern, but I don't need you to fight my battles." She left before he could respond. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm that was almost comfortable. Almost. Mara cooked. The men ate. The ranch kept running. But underneath the surface, something was shifting. The men who'd been openly hostile before had gone quiet, watching her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe. Or resentment. It was hard to tell. Tommy, the kid who'd complained about burnt bacon, started helping her carry water from the well without being asked. He didn't say much, just showed up every morning with 2 full buckets and set them by the stove. "Thanks," Mara said the first time. Tommy shrugged. "Least I can do." After, everything. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The older hands, the ones who'd been at the ranch longest, treated her differently now, too. They nodded when she served them, said please and thank you. One of them, a grizzled man named Hank with hands like tree roots, even complimented her biscuits. "Best I've had since my ma died," he said, then looked embarrassed and went back to eating. Mara didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded and moved on. But not everyone was warming up to her. There was a man named Silas Boon, who worked as one of the senior hands. He was older than most of the crew, maybe mid-40s, with a lean, wiry build and eyes that never seemed to blink. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Mara had noticed him watching her, not the way the younger men watched, with curiosity or grudging respect. Silas watched her the way a predator watches prey, waiting for a weakness. She tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it didn't matter, but it did. One evening, As she was cleaning up after dinner, Silas walked into the cookhouse alone. The other men had already left, heading back to the bunkhouses or out to finish the last of the day's work. Mara was at the sink scrubbing a pot when she heard his boots on the floor behind her. She didn't turn around. Need something? Just wanted to talk. I'm busy. Won't take long. Mara set the pot down, dried her hands on her apron, and turned to face him. What do you want? Silas leaned against one of the tables, arms crossed. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. I've been watching you. I noticed. You're a hard worker, I'll give you that. Thanks. But you're also making some of the boys uncomfortable. Mara's expression didn't change. Uncomfortable how? Working too hard. Making them look bad. That's not my problem. It is if it causes trouble. What kind of trouble? Silas shrugged. Men get resentful when someone shows them up. Starts to fester. Before you know it, you got a real problem on your hands. Mara studied him for a long moment. You telling me to slow down? I'm telling you to be smart. You might have impressed Rourke with that little supply run, but the rest of us? We've been doing this work for years. We don't need some outsider coming in and acting like she's better than us. I never said I was better than anyone. You don't have to say it. Your actions say it for you. Mara felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't advice. This was a warning. I'll keep that in mind, she said carefully. Silas pushed off the table, walked toward the door. He stopped in the doorway, looked back. Just trying to help, wouldn't want to see you get hurt. He left. Mara stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, her hands clenched into fists. She knew what this was. She'd seen it before, in the logging camps, in the kitchens where she'd worked. Men who couldn't stand the idea of a woman doing what they did, doing it better, doing it without complaint. They'd start with warnings, then rumors, then sabotage. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The answer, as always, was simple. Keep working, keep her head down, don't give them ammunition. But it was getting harder. The next morning, Mara found the flour sack torn open, half the contents spilled across the pantry floor. It could have been an accident, mice maybe, or someone being careless. But Mara didn't believe in coincidences. She cleaned it up without saying a word, made breakfast with what was left, and added flour to the supply list. 2 days later, the oven wouldn't heat properly. She spent an hour trying to fix it, finally figured out someone had tampered with the flue. Again, could have been an accident. Could have been. The men noticed. She could see it in the way they glanced at her when they thought she wasn't looking, the way conversation stopped when she walked into a room. They were waiting to see what she'd do, waiting to see if she'd break. Mara didn't break. She fixed the oven. She stretched the supplies. She kept cooking, kept serving, kept showing up every single day at 5 in the morning with hot food on the table. But the pressure was building. She could feel it in her chest, in the way her hands shook when she thought no one was watching, in the nightmares that woke her up in the middle of the night. She was tired. So tired. And for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch, she started to wonder if it was worth it. Sunday came, and with it, her half-day off. Mara slept until 7, a luxury that felt almost sinful, then got up and made a simple lunch for the men. By 2 o'clock she was done, and the rest of the day was hers. She didn't know what to do with it. She walked out to the edge of the ranch where the land stretched out in all directions, empty and endless. The sun was hot, but there was a breeze that carried the smell of sage and dust. Mara sat down on a rock and just looked. She thought about leaving, about packing her trunk, walking back to Red Hollow, finding another job in another town where nobody knew her. It would be easier, less fight, less pain, but easier had never been enough for her. She'd spent her whole life running from places that didn't want her, looking for somewhere she could belong. And every time, it ended the same way. People pushing her out, making her feel like she was too much or not enough, like her existence was an inconvenience they had to tolerate. She was so tired of running, but she was also tired of fighting. You look like you're about to do something stupid. Mara turned. Caleb Rourke was standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, looking at her with that same unreadable expression he always wore. I'm thinking, she said. That's what worries me. He walked over, sat down on another rock nearby. Mind if I join you? It's your land. That's not what I asked. Mara shrugged. Suit yourself. They sat in silence for a while, both staring out at the horizon. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. There was something almost comfortable about it, sitting with someone who didn't feel the need to fill every silence with words. Finally, Rourke spoke. You planning on quitting? What makes you think that? You've got that look. The one people get when they're weighing their options. Mara didn't answer. For what it's worth, Rourke said, I'd hate to see you go. Why? Because you're the best cook we've had in 5 years, and because you're tougher than half my crew, even if they won't admit it. That's what's causing the problem, Mara said quietly. Me being tougher than them. They don't like it. Some of them don't. Most of them respect it. Silas doesn't. Rourke's expression darkened. Silas say something to you? Nothing I can't handle. That's not what I asked. Mara looked at him. He warned me. Told me I was making the men uncomfortable, that I should slow down. And what did you say? I told him I'd keep it in mind. Rourke was quiet for a moment, then, Silas has been with me for 10 years. He's a good worker, but he's also stuck in his ways, doesn't like change. Doesn't like women, you mean? That too. So what am I supposed to do? Work less, make myself smaller so he feels better? No, Rourke said firmly. You keep doing exactly what you've been doing, and if Silas has a problem with it, he can take it up with me. That'll just make it worse. Maybe, but I'm not going to let him run you off, not after everything you've done for this place. Mara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he'd have her back when it mattered, but she'd been let down too many times before. I appreciate that, she said, but I can fight my own battles. I know you can. Doesn't mean you have to. He stood up, brushed the dust off his pants. Take the rest of the day. Rest. Think. Whatever you need. But don't quit. Not yet. He walked away, leaving Mara alone with the wind and the emptiness. She sat there until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire. Then she stood up and walked back to the cookhouse. She wasn't quitting. Not yet. The trouble started small. Little things. A pot left dirty when she knew she'd cleaned it. Salt mixed into the sugar. A cutting board that went missing and turned up in the bunkhouse. Mara dealt with each incident quietly, without complaint. She didn't go to Rourke, didn't confront anyone, just fixed the problems and kept working. But the men noticed. She could see it in the way they looked at her, some with sympathy, some with anger, some with embarrassment. They knew what was happening. They just didn't know what to do about it. Tommy started staying after breakfast, helping her clean up without being asked. You don't have to do that, Mara said. I know. He scrubbed a plate with more force than necessary. But it ain't right what's happening. Everyone knows it ain't right. Then why doesn't anyone say anything? Tommy didn't answer. They both knew why. Because Silas was senior. Because challenging him meant risking your job. Because it was easier to look away than to get involved. Mara didn't blame them. She'd been in their position before, watching someone else get torn down and doing nothing about it because self-preservation always won. But it still hurt. A week later, she found a dead rat in the flour sack. That was the line. Mara pulled the rat out, threw it in the trash, and stood there staring at the ruined flour. She'd already ordered more, but it wouldn't arrive for another few days, which meant she'd have to ration. Again. She was so tired of rationing, of stretching, of making do. She was tired of being pushed. Mara walked to the main house and knocked, hard. Rourke opened the door, took one look at her face, and stepped aside. What happened? Dead rat in the flour. His expression went cold. Accident? No. You sure? I'm sure. Rourke's jaw tightened. I'll talk to the men. Don't. I said don't. She took a breath, forced herself to stay calm. If you step in, it'll look like I can't handle my own problems, like I need you to protect me, and that'll make it worse. So what do you want me to do? Nothing. Just let me handle it. Rourke looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment he nodded. Fine, but if it escalates, it won't. She left before he could say anything else. That night Mara made dinner as usual. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, greens cooked with bacon. She served every man, poured coffee, cleared plates. And when Silas walked in, late as always, she set his plate down in front of him without a word. He looked at the food, looked at her. This looks good. Thanks. Must be hard cooking with limited supplies. I manage. I heard you had some trouble with the flour. Mara met his eyes. Nothing I couldn't handle. Silas smiled. It was the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. Good. Wouldn't want you to think someone was trying to run you off. The thought never crossed my mind. She walked away, back to the stove, and kept working. But inside she was shaking, not from fear, from rage. That night, alone in her bunk, Mara made a decision. She was done being passive, done taking it, done letting Silas think he could push her around without consequences. She was going to fight back, but she was going to do it smart. Over the next week, Mara started paying closer attention. She watched who came into the cookhouse when, who talked to whom, who seemed nervous around Silas, and who seemed loyal. She noticed that most of the younger hands avoided him, that the older ones tolerated him but didn't particularly like him, that even among the men who'd been at the ranch the longest, Silas didn't have many friends. He had power, but not loyalty. That was his weakness. Mara also started varying her routine. She woke up at different times, locked the pantry at night, kept her knives with her instead of leaving them out. The small sabotages stopped. Either Silas had gotten bored or he was waiting for a bigger opportunity. Mara was betting on the latter. She didn't have to wait long. It was a Friday night, 2 weeks after the rat incident, when everything came to a head. Mara was serving dinner, fried chicken, cornbread, coleslaw, when one of the hands, a quiet man named Peter, took a bite and immediately spat it out. What the hell? He looked at his plate, then at Mara. This tastes like soap. The room went silent. Mara's stomach dropped. She walked over, took the plate, tasted a small piece of the chicken. Peter was right. It tasted like soap. She grabbed another plate. Same thing. Every single piece of chicken had been contaminated. I didn't... She started, but the words stuck in her throat, because it didn't matter what she said. The damage was done. The men were looking at her with confusion, anger, disappointment. She could see it happening in real time, the trust she'd built over months crumbling in seconds. Maybe you used the wrong pan, someone suggested. Or didn't rinse something properly, another voice added. But Mara knew better. She'd been cooking for 30 years. She didn't make mistakes like that. This was sabotage, and it was deliberate. She looked around the room, searching for Silas. He was sitting at the far table, eating his own food without any problem. Their eyes met. He wasn't smiling. But there was something in his expression that told her everything she needed to know. He'd won. I'm sorry, Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll make something else. She gathered the contaminated plates, dumped them, and started over. But the room felt different now, colder, more distant. The men ate the replacement meal in silence, and when they left, nobody thanked her. Nobody looked at her at all. Mara cleaned up alone, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced. She'd been so careful, so vigilant. How had he done it? The answer came to her as she was putting away the last of the dishes. The lard. She'd used lard to fry the chicken, and the container had been sitting out all day because she'd needed it for cornbread earlier. Silas must have added soap to it when she wasn't looking. Just enough to ruin the food, but not enough to be obvious until it was too late. Simple. Effective. Devastating. Mara sat down at one of the tables, put her head in her hands, and felt something inside her crack. She'd fought so hard, done everything right, and it still wasn't enough. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe she should just leave. The door opened. Mara looked up, expecting Rourke. It was Tommy. He walked over, sat down across from her. It wasn't your fault. Doesn't matter. It does matter. Everyone knows Silas has it out for you. Knowing it and proving it are two different things. Tommy was quiet for a moment, then, I saw him. Mara's head snapped up. What? Earlier today, I saw him go into the cookhouse when you were out getting water. He was only in here for a minute, maybe less. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now... Why didn't you say something? Because I didn't know what he'd done, and I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. Tommy looked miserable. I'm sorry, I should have said something sooner. Mara stared at him. Would you testify to that? In front of Rourke? Yeah, if it helps. It helps. For the first time in hours, Mara felt something other than despair. She felt angry, and anger she could work with. She stood up. "Come with me." They walked to the main house together. Mara knocked, and when Rourke answered, she didn't wait for him to speak. "We need to talk, now." Rourke looked at Tommy, then back at Mara. "Come in." They sat in his office, Mara and Tommy on one side, Rourke on the other. Mara told him everything: the rat, the soap, Tommy's testimony. Rourke listened without interrupting, his expression getting darker with every word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You have proof?" he finally asked. Tommy saw him. "That's not proof. That's testimony. Silas will deny it." "I know." "So what do you want me to do?" Mara took a breath. "I want to challenge him." Rourke frowned. "Challenge him how?" "A cook-off. Him against me. Same conditions, same ingredients, same time limit. Winner stays, loser leaves." "That's insane." "Maybe. But it's the only way to settle this that doesn't involve your word against his. You make it a public challenge. The men witness it, and whoever loses has to go. No arguments, no appeals." Rourke leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You really think you can beat him?" "I know I can. He's been cooking for years." "So have I." "If you lose—" "I won't lose." Rourke looked at Tommy. "You're willing to back her story?" "Yes, sir." Rourke was silent for another long moment. Then he nodded. "Fine. I'll set it up for tomorrow night, after regular dinner. I'll make the announcement at breakfast." "Thank you," Mara said. "Don't thank me yet. If you're wrong about this, you're done, and I won't be able to protect you." "I understand." Mara and Tommy left. On the walk back to the cookhouse, Tommy looked nervous. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," Mara admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." Tommy managed a weak smile. "For what it's worth, I think you're going to win." "Thanks, kid." She went to bed that night knowing she wouldn't sleep. Tomorrow, everything would change, one way or another. Mara was already in the cookhouse when the first light broke over the horizon. She hadn't slept, hadn't even tried. Instead, she'd spent the night going over every recipe she knew, every technique she'd learned in 30 years of feeding people who didn't give a damn whether she lived or died. Her hands were steady as she started the fire in the stove. That was good. She couldn't afford to shake today. The men started filtering in around 5, quieter than usual. Word had spread fast. Ranch gossip always did. They knew something was happening, even if they didn't know exactly what. Mara served breakfast without meeting anyone's eyes. Pancakes, bacon, scrambled eggs, coffee strong enough to strip paint. She moved through the room like a ghost, there but not there, present but untouchable. When Caleb Rourke walked in, the room went completely silent. He stood near the door, hands in his pockets, and looked at every man in the room. His expression was unreadable, but there was something hard in his eyes that made even the toughest hands sit up straighter. "Listen up," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a knife. "Tonight, after regular dinner service, we're having a competition. Mara Vance and Silas Boon will each prepare a meal using the same ingredients, same equipment, same time limit. The crew will vote on which meal is better. Winner keeps their job. Loser leaves the ranch. No appeals, no second chances." The room erupted. "What the hell? You can't be serious. This ain't right." Rourke held up a hand and the noise died down. "This was Miss Vance's idea. Silas has already agreed to the terms. The competition starts at 8 o'clock. Anyone who wants to watch is welcome. Anyone who doesn't can stay in the bunkhouse. Either way, by tomorrow morning, one of them will be gone." He looked at Mara. She met his gaze and nodded once. Then he looked across the room to where Silas sat, calm as Sunday morning, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You understand the stakes?" Rourke asked him. "I do," Silas said, "and I accept." "Good. Then we're done here." Rourke left. The men started talking all at once, their voices overlapping in a chaotic mess of speculation and argument. Mara didn't listen. She just cleared the tables, washed the dishes, and started preparing for lunch. She had one shot at this, one chance to prove she belonged. She wasn't going to waste it thinking about what would happen if she failed. Lunch service was tense. The men ate quickly, barely tasting the food, their eyes darting between Mara and Silas like they were watching two gunslingers size each other up before a duel. Silas, for his part, seemed completely relaxed. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, making a show of enjoying the meal. When he was done, he caught Mara's eye and smiled. "Good luck tonight," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're gonna need it." Mara didn't respond. She just took his plate and walked away. Tommy found her in the pantry an hour later, taking inventory of supplies. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine." "You don't look fine." Mara set down the sack of flour she'd been examining and turned to face him. "What do you want me to say, Tommy? That I'm scared? That I'm worried I'm going to lose and have to leave the only stable job I've had in 5 years? Because I am. I'm terrified, but being scared doesn't change anything. I still have to do this." Tommy shifted his weight from foot to foot, looking uncomfortable. "For what it's worth, everyone I talk to is rooting for you. Everyone except Silas and his friends. He doesn't have that many friends." "He has enough." Tommy was quiet for a moment, then, "What are you going to make?" "I don't know yet." "You don't know? The competition's in a few hours." "I know that." Mara rubbed her face, suddenly exhausted. I can't decide. Everything I think of feels wrong, too simple, too complicated, too risky." "What would you make if you weren't worried about losing?" The question caught her off guard. Mara thought about it, really thought about it, and the answer came to her immediately. "Pot roast," she said, "with potatoes and carrots and onions, the way my mother used to make it. Nothing fancy, just good food. Honest food." Tommy grinned. "Then make that." "It's too simple. Silas will probably make something impressive, something with technique." "Who cares what Silas makes? You said it yourself. Good food is good food. And if these men can't appreciate a proper pot roast, then they don't deserve you anyway." Mara looked at him, this kid who'd gone from mocking her bacon to defending her honor, and felt something loosen in her chest. "When did you get so smart?" she asked. "I've always been smart. You just didn't notice." Despite everything, Mara smiled. "Get out of here. I've got work to do." Tommy left, and Mara went back to her inventory. But this time, she knew exactly what she was looking for. Dinner service that night felt like a funeral. The men ate mechanically, their attention already on what was coming next. Mara served them roasted chicken and vegetables, simple, filling, nothing that would compete with what she'd be making later. Silas didn't show up for dinner. That was unusual. He always showed up for dinner. Mara told herself it didn't matter. Told herself he was probably just preparing, same as her. But the absence felt deliberate, strategic, like he was already treating this as a war. By 7:30, the cookhouse had been transformed. Rourke and a few of the hands had cleared the tables to the sides of the room, creating 2 workstations in the center. Each station had a stove, a prep table, and access to the same pantry supplies. The men started filing in around 7:45, filling the benches along the walls. The room was packed. Mara counted at least 25 men, maybe more. Everyone wanted to see this. Rourke stood between the 2 stations, arms crossed. "Rules are simple. You each have 2 hours to prepare a complete meal. You can use anything from the pantry. You can't sabotage each other's food. You can't ask for help. When time's up, the crew will taste both meals and vote. Majority wins." "Questions?" Mara shook her head. Across from her, Silas did the same. "Good. You start when I say go." Rourke pulled out his pocket watch. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1, go." Mara moved. She grabbed the beef roast she'd set aside earlier, the one she'd been letting come to room temperature for the past hour. She seasoned it with salt, pepper, and a touch of garlic powder, then set it in a heavy pot with a little oil to sear. While the meat browned, she peeled potatoes and carrots, cut them into chunks, sliced onions. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought would have slowed her down. She could hear Silas working across from her, the sound of knife on cutting board, the hiss of something hitting hot oil. She didn't look, couldn't afford to. She needed to focus on her own food, her own rhythm. The beef seared, filling the cookhouse with a smell that made several of the watching men shift in their seats. Mara flipped it, browned the other side, then added the vegetables to the pot along with beef stock, a splash of vinegar, and a bay leaf. She covered the pot and slid it into the oven. Now came the hard part. Waiting. Pot roast wasn't a fast meal. It needed time for the meat to become tender, for the flavors to meld. She had 2 hours. It would be close. Mara wiped down her station, checked the oven temperature, and forced herself to breathe. Across the room, Silas was working on something that involved a lot of pans and a lot of steps. She caught glimpses: flour, eggs, what might have been cream, something complicated, something designed to impress. Good. Let him impress them. She'd feed them. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. The cookhouse was hot from the two ovens running, and the smell of cooking food hung heavy in the air. Some of the men looked hungry, others looked nervous. Tommy sat near the front, his eyes fixed on Mara's station. When she caught his eye, he gave her a small nod of encouragement. It helped more than he probably knew. At the 2-hour mark, Rourke called time. All right, both of you, plate your food, 5 minutes. Mara pulled the pot from the oven. The meat was fork tender, falling apart at the touch. The vegetables were soft, the broth rich and dark. She ladled generous portions into serving bowls, making sure each one had a good mix of meat and vegetables. Across from her, Silas was plating something that looked like chicken in a cream sauce with what might have been pasta. It looked good, professional. Mara's pot roast looked like exactly what it was: home cooking. She set the bowls on a serving table. Silas did the same with his plates. Rourke examined both offerings, then turned to the crew. All right, everyone gets to taste both. Take your time. When you're ready, we'll vote. The men formed a line. One by one, they took a bowl of Mara's pot roast and a plate of Silas's chicken. They found seats, started eating. Mara watched their faces, trying to read their reactions. Some of them looked pleased. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked conflicted. Nobody looked disappointed. That had to count for something. When everyone had finished eating, Rourke stood up again. Time to vote. Show of hands. Who votes for Silas's meal? Hands went up. Mara counted. 8, 9, 10. Her stomach dropped. And who votes for Mara's meal? More hands went up. Mara counted again, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. 12, 13, 14, 15. Rourke counted as well, his expression neutral. When all the hands were down, he looked at both of them. Mara wins, 15-10. The room erupted in noise, like some men cheering, others groaning, everyone talking at once. Mara stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. She'd won. She'd actually won. Across the room, Silas's face had gone pale. He looked at Rourke, then at Mara, then back at Rourke. This is bullshit, he said. Those were the terms, Rourke said calmly. You agreed to them. The vote was rigged. You put her up to this because you wanted me gone. The vote was fair. The men chose her food over yours. You lost. Silas's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Mara thought he might actually throw a punch, but then something in him seemed to collapse. His shoulders sagged, and when he spoke again, his voice was bitter. Fine. I'll be gone by morning. He pushed through this crowd and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The noise in the room died down. The men looked at each other, then at Mara, then at Rourke. Well, Rourke said, I'd say that's settled. Everyone back to your bunks. We've got work tomorrow. The men filed out slowly, some of them stopping to congratulate Mara on their way. Tommy grabbed her in a hug that nearly knocked her over. I knew you'd win, he said. I knew it. Thanks, kid. When the last man left, it was just Mara and Rourke in the cookhouse. She started cleaning up, her hand shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. You did good, Rourke said. I got lucky. No, you're good at what you do, and the men know it. Mara didn't know what to say to that, so she just kept cleaning. Rourke watched her for a moment, then walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the knob. For what it's worth, he said, I'm glad you stayed. He left before she could respond. Mara finished cleaning in silence, then walked back to her bunk. She lay down on the thin mattress, stared at the ceiling, and waited to feel something. Relief, pride, satisfaction. But all she felt was tired. She'd won the battle. But the war wasn't over. It never was. The next morning, Silas was gone. His bunk was empty, his belongings cleared out. He'd left in the middle of the night without saying goodbye to anyone. Good riddance, Mara thought. But she couldn't quite shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of it. Men like Silas didn't just disappear. They festered. But that was a problem for another day. Breakfast service went smoothly. The men were in good spirits, talking and laughing in a way they hadn't in weeks. A few of them complimented the food. One of them, Hank, The old-timer with the tree root hands even asked for seconds. Best biscuits I've had in years, he said. You said that last month, Mara reminded him. Well, they're even better now. She allowed herself a small smile at that. But the good mood didn't last. 2 days after the competition, one of the newer hands, a young guy named Danny, approached her during lunch cleanup. Miss Vance, can I ask you something? Sure. Danny glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. Did you really beat Silas fair and square? Mara's smile disappeared. You were there. You saw the vote. I know, but some of the guys are saying you only won because you're a woman, that the men felt sorry for you. The words hit her like a physical blow. Mara set down the plate she'd been washing and turned to face him fully. Do you think I won because they felt sorry for me? She asked quietly. Danny shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. I mean, your food was good, but Silas's was really good too. And he's been cooking longer than you. I've been cooking for 30 years, Mara interrupted. I've fed logging crews, mining camps, ranch hands. I've cooked over open fires in blizzards and in kitchens so hot you couldn't breathe. I've made meals out of nothing but salt, pork, and prayer. So when I tell you I won that competition fair and square, I'm not guessing. I know. Danny took a step back, his face flushing red. I didn't mean, yes, you did. And you're not the only one thinking it. Mara could feel the anger building in her chest, hot and bitter. Let me make something very clear. I didn't ask for anyone's pity. I didn't ask for special treatment. I challenged Silas because he was sabotaging my food and making my life hell. And I won because I'm better at my job than he was at his. If you or anyone else has a problem with that, you know where the door is. She turned back to the dishes, her hands shaking with fury. Danny stood there for a moment longer, then walked away without another word. Mara scrubbed the same plate 3 times before she realized what she was doing. She set it down, gripped the edge of the sink, and took a long, slow breath. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. Winning the competition hadn't settled anything. It had just given people a new reason to doubt her. She wasn't good enough on her own merit. She was only here because the men felt sorry for her. The thought made her want to scream. Instead, she finished the dishes and started preparing dinner. That night, lying in her bunk, Mara couldn't sleep. Her mind kept circling back to Danny's question, to the implication behind it. Had the men voted for her out of pity? She didn't want to believe it, wanted to trust that they'd chosen her food because it was better, because she'd earned their respect. But doubt was a poison, and once it got in, it was hard to get out. Mara thought about all the times in her life when she'd been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. When people had assumed she couldn't do something because of how she looked, because of what they thought they knew about her. She'd spent her whole life fighting that, proving people wrong, showing them she was capable, and she was so tired of it. What if she just stopped? What if she packed her trunk, walked away, and found a place where she didn't have to fight for every scrap of respect? The thought was tempting, seductive even. But Mara had never been good at taking the easy way out. She fell asleep sometime after midnight, her dreams filled with images of kitchens she'd worked in, people she'd fed, battles she'd fought and lost and won. When she woke up, the decision had already been made. She wasn't leaving, not yet. The next few days passed in a haze of work and worry. Mara cooked, served, cleaned. The men ate. Some of them thanked her. Most didn't. And all the while she could feel the doubt growing, not just in them, in herself. What if Danny was right? What if she had only won because the men felt sorry for her? What if she really was just a charity case? The thought burrowed into her brain like a tick, feeding on her insecurity, growing fat on her fears. She started second-guessing everything. The way she seasoned the food, the portions she served, the timing of the meals. Nothing felt right anymore. On Thursday night, a week after the competition, Mara burned the cornbread. It was a small thing, an easy mistake. She'd been distracted, thinking about Danny's question, and she'd left the pan in the oven too long. The men noticed. Cornbread's a little dark tonight, one of them said. Yeah, tastes burnt. You feeling all right, Miss Vance? Mara apologized, scraped the burnt parts off, served what was salvageable. But the damage was done. She could see it in their faces, the doubt creeping back in. Maybe she wasn't as good as they thought. Maybe Silas had been right about her all along. That night, Mara sat in the dark cookhouse and stared at the cold stove. She was falling apart. She could feel it happening, could feel the cracks spreading through her foundation like ice through stone. And the worst part was, She didn't know how to stop it. A knock on the door startled her out of her thoughts. She looked up to see Caleb Rourke standing in the doorway. "You planning on sitting in the dark all night?" he asked. "Maybe." He walked in, closed the door behind him. "Mind if I join you?" "It's your ranch." "That's not what I asked." Mara shrugged. Rourke pulled out a chair, sat down across from her. They sat in silence for a while. Then Rourke said, "You've been off lately." "I'm fine." "You burned the cornbread." "Everyone makes mistakes." "Not you, not usually." Rourke leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "What's going on?" Mara didn't want to answer, didn't want to admit that she was crumbling, that the victory she'd fought so hard for felt hollow. But the words came out anyway. "What if they're right?" she said quietly. "What if I only won because they felt sorry for me? What if I'm not actually good enough, and everyone's just been pretending because they don't want to hurt my feelings?" Rourke was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you really believe that?" "I don't know what I believe anymore." "Then let me tell you what I believe." Rourke's voice was firm, no room for argument. "I believe you're the best cook this ranch has seen in years. I believe you work harder than half my crew. I believe you rode through a storm to save us from starving, and I believe you won that competition because your food was better, not because anyone felt sorry for you, because you earned it." But Danny said, "Danny's a kid who doesn't know his ass from his elbow. He's repeating gossip because he's too young to have an original thought. Don't let him get in your head." Mara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he was telling the truth, but the doubt was still there, gnawing at her. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she admitted. "I'm so tired of fighting, of proving myself, of wondering if I'm good enough." Rourke reached across the table, covered her hand with his. The gesture was unexpected, intimate in a way that made her breath catch. "You are good enough," he said. "You've always been good enough. The problem isn't you. It's everyone else who can't see it." Mara looked down at their hands. His was calloused, scarred from years of ranch work. Hers was the same. They were more alike than she'd realized. "I hired you because you were strong," Rourke said. "Because you didn't back down when I tried to intimidate you. Because you looked me in the eye and told me you could do the job, and I believed you. Nothing that's happened since has changed my mind. You belong here, Mara, whether you believe it or not." Something in his voice, the certainty, the conviction, broke through the doubt. Not all of it, but enough. Mara took a shaky breath. "Thank you." "Don't thank me, just don't quit." "I won't." Rourke squeezed her hand once, then let go. He stood up, started toward the door. "Caleb?" He stopped, looked back. "Why do you care so much? Whether I stay or go?" Rourke was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because this ranch is better with you in it. And so am I." He left before she could respond. Mara sat alone in the dark, her hand still warm from where he'd touched it, and felt something shift inside her. The doubt was still there. The fear. The exhaustion. But underneath it all, buried deep, was something else. Hope. Maybe she did belong here after all. The next morning, Mara woke up before dawn with a clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. She lay in the narrow bunk for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and made herself a promise. No more doubt, no more second-guessing. She was done letting other people's opinions dictate how she felt about herself. She got up, dressed, and went to work. Breakfast was perfect. The biscuits were golden, the gravy rich and peppery, the bacon crispy without being burnt. She moved through the cookhouse with purpose, serving each man with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The men noticed. She could see it in the way they looked at her, not with pity or doubt, but with something closer to respect. Tommy grinned at her when she refilled his coffee. "Whatever you did different today, keep doing it." "I didn't do anything different." "Yeah, you did. You look like you again." Mara didn't know how to respond to that, so she just smiled and moved on. After breakfast, as she was cleaning up, Rourke appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything, just leaned against the frame and watched her work. "Something you need?" Mara asked without looking up. "Just checking in." "I'm fine." "I can see that." She glanced at him. He was almost smiling. Almost. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just glad to see you back." "I never left." "Yeah, you did. For a while there." Rourke straightened up. But you're back now. That's what matters. He left before she could argue. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Mara cooked with the same intensity she always had, but without the undercurrent of desperation that had been driving her before. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She was just doing her job. And somehow, that made all the difference. The men responded to it. The younger hands started asking her questions. How to make certain dishes, what spices worked best, how to tell when meat was done without cutting into it. At first, Mara was suspicious. She thought they were testing her, looking for weaknesses. But they weren't. They genuinely wanted to learn. So she taught them. Not in any formal ways. Just small lessons here and there, showing them techniques as she worked. How to properly sharpen a knife, how to season a cast iron pan, how to make gravy without lumps. Tommy became her unofficial assistant, showing up early to help with prep work and staying late to clean. He was eager, clumsy sometimes, but he learned fast. "Why are you helping me?" Mara asked him one morning as they peeled potatoes together. Tommy shrugged. "Because you're teaching me something useful. My ma tried to teach me to cook when I was a kid, but I never paid attention. Figured it was women's work." He looked embarrassed. "I was stupid." "You were a kid." "Yeah, well, I'm not a kid anymore, and I figure if I'm going to survive out here, I should know how to feed myself." Smart thinking. "Plus," Tommy added with a grin, "if I ever get married, my wife will appreciate not having to do all the cooking." Mara snorted. "If you find a woman willing to marry you, it won't be because you can make biscuits." "Hey, biscuits are important." Despite herself, Mara laughed. It felt good. When was the last time she'd laughed? The work continued. Mara fell into a rhythm that felt sustainable for the first time since she'd arrived. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. It was a Wednesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after the competition, when everything changed again. Mara was in the pantry taking inventory when she heard horses approaching, a lot of them. She walked to the window and looked out to see a group of riders coming up the road, maybe 6 or 7 of them, all armed. Her stomach tightened. Strangers with guns were never good news. She watched as they dismounted in front of the main house. Rourke came out to meet them, his posture tense but controlled. There was a conversation Mara couldn't hear, gestures that looked heated. Then one of the strangers pointed at the cookhouse. At her. Mara stepped back from the window, her heart racing. She told herself she was being paranoid. There was no reason for them to be talking about her, but the feeling in her gut said otherwise. A few minutes later, Rourke appeared at the cookhouse door. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "We need to talk," he said. What's going on?" "Inside, not here." They walked to his office. Rourke closed the door, gestured for her to sit. She did, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. "Those men outside," Rourke began. "They're from the Chambers Ranch, about 50 miles east of here." Mara waited. "Silas is working for them now. He's been telling stories." The bottom dropped out of Mara's stomach. "What kind of stories?" "That you cheated in the competition. That I rigged the vote because—" Rourke hesitated. "Because you and I are involved." Mara felt her face go hot. "That's a lie." "I know it is, but Silas is convincing. And the Chambers Ranch owner, a man named Dale Chambers, he's using it as leverage. He's been trying to buy me out for years. Thinks he can pressure me by threatening my reputation." "What does he want?" "He wants me to sell. Says if I don't, he'll spread the story all over the territory. Make it so no one will work for me. No one will do business with me." Mara stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "This is my fault." "No, it's not." "Yes, it is. If I hadn't challenged Silas, if I just kept my head down, then he would have driven you out anyway, and we'd be in the same position." Rourke's voice was firm. "This isn't about you, Mara. It's about Chambers wanting my land. Silas is just giving him an excuse." "So what are you going to do?" Rourke was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to tell them to go to hell." "That's not going to make them stop." "I know. But I'm not selling. And I'm not firing you to make them happy." Mara felt something crack in her chest. "You should." "What?" "Fire me. Tell them it was all true, that you made a mistake, that I'm gone. Then they'll leave you alone." Rourke stared at her. "You're serious. I'm not worth losing your ranch over." "That's not your decision to make." "Caleb, no." He stood up, walked around the desk until he was standing right in front of her. I told you before, you belong here, and I meant it. I'm not going to throw you out because some bitter man is spreading lies. But my reputation will survive. I've been dealing with men like Chambers my whole life. They bluster and threaten, but in the end, they're cowards. He won't actually do anything. You don't know that. I know him. He's testing me. If I cave now, he'll just find another excuse to come after me. The only way to deal with a bully is to stand your ground. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to convince him that she wasn't worth the fight, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't doing this out of charity or pity. He was doing it because he believed she deserved to stay. And maybe, just maybe, he was right. Okay, she said quietly, but if this gets worse, it won't. If it does, I'm leaving. I won't let you lose everything because of me. Rourke's expression softened. Deal. The men from the Chambers Ranch left an hour later, riding off in a cloud of dust and mutual hostility. Mara watched from the cookhouse window, her stomach still twisted in knots. She tried to go back to work, but she couldn't focus. Her mind kept circling back to what Rourke had said. He'd chosen her. Over his reputation, over his business relationships. Why? She was still thinking about it that night when there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Tommy standing there, looking nervous. Sorry to bother you, he said, but some of the guys wanted me to tell you something. What? We heard about what happened, about Silas and the Chambers Ranch, and we wanted you to know that we don't believe any of it. We know you won fair and square. Mara felt her throat tighten. Thanks, Tommy. Also, Hank wanted me to tell you that if the Chambers men come back, they'll have to go through us first. We got your back. That's not necessary. Maybe not, but we're doing it anyway. Tommy grinned. You're one of us now. We take care of our own. He left before Mara could respond. She stood in the doorway staring out at the dark ranch and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, like she was part of something, like she had people who would stand with her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. It was terrifying and comforting all at once. The next few weeks were tense. Word spread about the confrontation with the Chambers Ranch, and the men were on edge, waiting for the next shoe to drop. But nothing happened. No more riders. No more threats. Just the usual rhythm of ranch life. Slowly, the tension eased. Mara kept cooking, the men kept eating, and life went on. But something had shifted. The men treated her differently now. Not as an outsider they were tolerating, but as part of the crew. They included her in conversations, asked her opinion on things that had nothing to do with food, made jokes that weren't at her expense. One evening, as she was serving dinner, one of the older hands, a quiet man named Robert, spoke up. Miss Vance, my daughter's getting married next month. I was wondering if you might have any advice for her. About cooking for a household, I mean. Mara nearly dropped the ladle. Your daughter wants cooking advice from me? I told her about your pot roast. She wants to know how you make it. It's just pot roast. It's the best pot roast I've ever had, and my daughter deserves to know how to make food that good. Mara didn't know what to say. She'd spent so long being dismissed and underestimated that genuine respect still caught her off guard. I'd be happy to help, she said finally. When's the wedding? 3 weeks? If you wanted to write down the recipe, I could send it to her. Better than that. If she wants to come visit, I can teach her in person. Robert's face lit up. You'd do that? Of course. That Sunday, Robert's daughter showed up. Her name was Sarah, and she was maybe 19, with her father's quiet demeanor and her own nervous energy. Mara spent the afternoon teaching her how to make pot roast, biscuits, and apple pie. Sarah watched everything with wide eyes, taking notes in a small leather book she'd brought. You make it look so easy, Sarah said as Mara demonstrated how to crimp a pie crust. That's because I've done it 1,000 times. You will too, eventually. I hope so. I'm terrified of disappointing my husband. If he's worth marrying, he won't care if you burn dinner occasionally. He'll just appreciate that you tried. Sarah smiled at that. My pa says you're the toughest woman he's ever met. Mara laughed. Your pa's being generous. He doesn't lie. He says you rode through a storm to save the ranch, that you stood up to a man who was trying to run you off, that you're, what was the word he used? Unbreakable. Mara's hand stilled on the pie crust. I'm not unbreakable. I've just had a lot of practice getting back up. That's what unbreakable means, isn't it? Not that you don't fall, just that you don't stay down. The girl was smarter than she looked. When Sarah left that evening, she hugged Mara, a quick, impulsive gesture that took them both by surprise. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "You're welcome. Good luck with the wedding." Mara watched her ride away, feeling something warm settle in her chest. She was helping people, not just feeding them, but actually making a difference in their lives. Maybe that was enough. The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into fall, the air growing crisp and the nights getting longer. Mara settled into her role at the ranch with a comfort she'd never experienced before. She wasn't just the cook anymore. She was part of the fabric of the place, woven into the daily life in a way that felt permanent. Tommy had gotten good enough at basic cooking that she trusted him to handle breakfast on Sundays, giving her a full day off for the first time since she'd started. The younger hands still came to her with questions, and she still taught them what she knew. And Rourke had started spending more time in the cookhouse, not interfering, just present. Sometimes he'd sit at one of the tables after the men had left, drinking coffee and talking to her about the ranch, about the weather, about nothing in particular. It was nice, comfortable in a way that should have been worrying, but wasn't. One evening, as they were sitting together after dinner, Rourke asked, "You ever think about doing something else?" "Like what?" "I don't know. Opening your own restaurant, running a boarding house, something where you're not working yourself to death feeding a bunch of ungrateful cowboys." Mara smiled. "They're not ungrateful. And no, I haven't thought about it." "Why not?" "Because this is enough. I spent so many years looking for something better, somewhere I'd be appreciated, and I found it. Why would I leave?" Rourke was quiet for a moment, then he said, "What if I told you I was thinking of expanding?" "Expanding how? Buying more land, running more cattle? It would mean hiring more men, which means more mouths to feed." "I can handle it." "Not alone. You can't?" "You'd need help. Real help. Not just Tommy fumbling his way through breakfast." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we build you a bigger kitchen. Hire an assistant cook, maybe 2. Turn this into a proper operation." Mara stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because this ranch runs better when people are well fed, and because you've earned it. Caleb, just think about it. You don't have to decide now, but the offer's there." He stood up, started to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm glad you stayed. Even when I gave you every reason to leave. I'm glad you stayed." He left before she could respond. Mara sat alone in the cookhouse, her mind racing. A bigger kitchen, an assistant, a real operation. It was everything she had never let herself dream of, because dreaming led to disappointment. But maybe this time was different. Maybe this time she could actually have something good. The decision came easier than she expected. 2 days later, she found Rourke in the barn, checking on a horse that had been favoring one leg. "I thought about your offer," she said. He looked up. "And?" "I'll do it. On one condition." "What's that?" "I want to train my assistants myself. I'm not working with anyone who doesn't understand that feeding people isn't just about putting food on a table. It's about respect, dignity, making them feel like they matter." Rourke smiled, a real smile, not the half smirk he usually wore. "Deal." They shook on it, and Mara felt something settle in her chest. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was building something that would last. Construction on the new kitchen started the following week. The men worked in shifts, building an extension onto the cookhouse that would double its size. There would be 2 stoves instead of 1, more counter space, a proper pantry with shelves that didn't sag. Mara spent her free time planning the layout, thinking about what she'd need, how the space would flow. It felt like planting a garden. You put in the work not knowing if anything would grow, but hoping, always hoping. Tommy had been ecstatic when she told him he'd be one of her assistants. "Really? You're not just saying that?" "I'm not just saying that, but you're going to have to work harder than you've ever worked in your life." "I can do that." "Good, because I won't tolerate laziness or carelessness. If you're going to work in my kitchen, you're going to do it right." "Yes, ma'am." The other assistant she hired was a surprise, a woman named Clara who'd been working at the general store in Red Hollow. She was older than Mara, maybe 50, with gray streaks in her hair and hands that showed years of hard labor. "I heard you were looking for help," Clara had said when she showed up at the ranch one Sunday. "I've been cooking for boarders for 20 years. Figured I could do the same here." "Why leave the store?" "Because I'm tired of serving men who talk down to me like I'm stupid. I heard you don't tolerate that kind of treatment. Mara liked her immediately. The new kitchen was finished by late October, just as the first real cold snap hit. Mara stood in the middle of the expanded space, looking at the two gleaming stoves, the long prep tables, the pantry stocked with supplies. It was perfect. Tommy and Clara started the following Monday. Mara worked them hard, teaching them her methods, her standards, her expectations. She didn't yell, didn't belittle, but she didn't accept mediocrity either. And they rose to the challenge. Within 2 weeks, the three of them had found a rhythm. Mara handled the main dishes, Clara worked on sides and baking, Tommy did prep and cleanup. The meals got better, more varied, more ambitious. The men noticed. "This is the best food I've had in my entire life," one of them said during dinner one night. "Miss Vance, you're spoiling us," another added. "Don't get used to it," Mara replied, but she was smiling. That night after everyone had left, Rourke appeared in the doorway of the new kitchen. "Looks like it's working out," he said. "It is." "You happy?" Mara thought about it, really thought about it. "Yeah," she said finally. "I think I am." Rourke walked into the kitchen, stood beside her. They looked out at the space they'd built together. Not just the physical room, but the operation, the team, the future. "Thank you," Mara said quietly, "for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe, but it would have taken longer and hurt more." Rourke turned to face her. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite read, something tender and uncertain and hopeful, all at once. "Mara," he said, "I need to tell you something." Her heart started beating faster. "What?" "I didn't expand the kitchen just because it made business sense. I did it because I wanted you to stay, because I care about you. More than I probably should." Mara's breath caught. She'd suspected maybe, but hearing him say it out loud was different. "Caleb, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that you matter to me, that this place is better with you in it, that I'm better with you in it." For a long moment, Mara couldn't speak. Then she reached out, took his hand. "I care about you too," she said. "I didn't want to. Didn't think I could. But I do." Rourke squeezed her hand. "So what do we do about it?" "I don't know, but maybe we figure it out together." "Together sounds good." They stood there in the new kitchen, hands linked, both of them smiling like fools. Outside, the wind howled and the temperature dropped, and the frontier remained as harsh and unforgiving as ever. But inside, something warm and fragile and precious had taken root. And Mara, for the first time in her life, believed it might actually survive. Winter came to the ranch like an unwelcome guest, sudden, harsh, and impossible to ignore. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the ground in white and turning the morning routine into a battle against the cold. Mara woke each day to frozen water buckets and a kitchen so cold she could see her breath until the stoves got going. But the new kitchen made all the difference. With 2 stoves running and 3 people working, they could keep the space warm and the food hot. The men came in from the cold, grateful for coffee that burned their tongues and breakfast that stuck to their ribs. Mara had never felt more in her element. She moved through the kitchen with Clara and Tommy flanking her, the 3 of them working in a synchronization that came from weeks of practice and mutual respect. Clara handled the baking. Her biscuits were almost as good as Mara's, and her pies were better. Tommy had developed a surprising talent for breakfast meats, seasoning bacon and sausage with just the right blend of salt and pepper. They were a team, a real team. And for Mara, that meant everything. The relationship with Caleb had evolved slowly, carefully, like 2 people walking across ice they weren't sure would hold. They didn't broadcast it to the crew, didn't need to. But the men noticed anyway. The way people always notice when something shifts between 2 people who spend time together. Tommy had been the first to mention it, cornering Mara one morning while Clara was in the pantry. "So you and the boss, huh?" Mara had given him a look that could freeze water. "That's none of your business." "I'm just saying, it's good. You're good together." "Tommy, I mean it. He's been different since you got here. Less alone." Mara hadn't known what to say to that, so she'd just told him to get back to work. But the words had stayed with her, less alone. She understood that feeling better than she wanted to admit. The days grew shorter and colder. By mid-December, the ranch was buried under 2 feet of snow, and getting supplies from town became a twice-monthly ordeal that required planning and luck in equal measure. Mara adjusted the menus to work with what they had, stretching provisions, getting creative with root vegetables and preserved meats. The men didn't complain. If anything, they seemed to appreciate the food more during the lean times, understanding the work that went into every meal. One evening, as Mara was cleaning up after dinner, Hank approached her with his hat in his hands. "Miss Vance, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for showing us what real strength looks like." Mara set down the dish she'd been washing. "Hank, I'm just doing my job." "No, ma'am. You're doing a lot more than that. My daughter Sarah, she came back to visit last week. Told me she's been using everything you taught her. Says her husband brags about her cooking to anyone who will listen." "That's all Sarah. She put in the work." "But you gave her the tools. That matters." Hank shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable with the emotion in his voice. "I just wanted you to know that what you do here, it matters. You matter." He left before Mara could respond, and she stood there in the empty kitchen, fighting back tears she didn't fully understand. She mattered. Someone had said it out loud, and they'd meant it. The holidays approached. Mara had never been one for celebration, too many bad Christmases, too many years spent alone or in places where she wasn't welcome. But Clara and Tommy were insistent. "We should do something special," Clara said one morning. "A real Christmas dinner. Turkey, stuffing, the works." "That's a lot of work," Mara pointed out. "So? We've got 3 of us now. We can handle it. The men will expect their regular meals too. Then we'll do both." Clara's expression was firm. These men work hard all year. They deserve one nice meal to celebrate. Mara looked at Tommy, who nodded enthusiastically. "I'm in. We can do this." Against her better judgment, Mara agreed. They spent the next 2 weeks planning. Mara made lists, checked supplies, calculated portions. They'd need to order extra from town: turkeys, cranberries, sweet potatoes, ingredients for pies and cakes. It would be expensive, and Mara didn't want to ask Caleb for the money. But when she mentioned it to him, he just pulled out his wallet and handed her twice what she'd asked for. "Make it a meal they'll remember," he said. "This is too much." "It's not enough. Not for what you do." He kissed her forehead, a gesture that still felt new and startling. "Make it special." Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and temperatures so cold that water froze in seconds. Mara, Clara, and Tommy had been working since before dawn, preparing a feast that would feed 30 men with enough left over for seconds and thirds. 2 turkeys roasted in the ovens, filling the cookhouse with a smell that made everyone who passed by stop and inhale deeply. Sweet potatoes baked alongside them, and Clara's hands were elbow-deep in pie dough for the 4th time that day. Tommy was mashing regular potatoes with butter and cream, his face red from the heat of the kitchen. "How much butter did you say?" "Enough that you feel guilty about it," Mara replied, checking on the stuffing. "I'm already feeling guilty." "Then add a little more." By 6 o'clock, everything was ready. The tables had been pushed together to form one long surface, and someone had found candles to line the center. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and inviting in a way the cookhouse had never been before. The men filed in at 7, quieter than usual, dressed in their cleanest shirts. They looked around at the decorated space, at the food laid out in serving dishes, and something in their expressions softened. Caleb stood at the head of the table. "Before we eat, I want to say something. This year has been hard. We lost a barn to that storm. We had trouble with the Chambers Ranch. We went through more changes than any of us wanted, but we made it through. And a big part of that is because of the woman who's been feeding us, taking care of us, and refusing to give up no matter how hard we made it for her." He looked at Mara. "So thank you, Mara, for everything." The men erupted in applause. Mara felt her face go hot, and she wanted to tell them to stop, that she was just doing her job, that it wasn't a big deal. But Clara grabbed her hand and squeezed. "Let them," she whispered. "You earned this." So Mara stood there and let them applaud, let them show her appreciation she'd spent her whole life thinking she didn't deserve. And when they finally sat down to eat, she joined them at the table instead of serving. Clara and Tommy had insisted. Tonight, she was part of the celebration, not just the person providing it. The meal was perfect. The turkey was moist, the stuffing savory, the sweet potatoes sweet enough to qualify as dessert. The men ate with enthusiasm, talking and laughing in a way that reminded Mara of family dinners she'd never actually had. Halfway through the meal, Tommy stood up with his glass of cider. "I want to make a toast. To Miss Vance, Miss Clara, and to second chances, and to the best food in the whole territory." "Hear, hear!" the men chorused, raising their glasses. Mara raised hers too, blinking back tears for the second time that month. When the meal was over and the men had returned to their bunkhouses, full and content, Mara, Clara, and Tommy tackled the cleanup. It took hours, but none of them minded. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from people who understand each other. When the last dish was put away, Clara hugged Mara tight. "Merry Christmas, boss." "Merry Christmas, Clara." Tommy hugged her too, nearly lifting her off her feet. "This was the best Christmas I ever had. You're too easy to please." "Maybe, but I mean it." After they left, Mara walked out onto the porch of the cookhouse and looked up at the stars. The sky was clear and cold, each star sharp as a knife point. She could hear the horses in the barn, the soft lowing of cattle in the distance. This place had become home, not just the ranch, but the people, the work, the sense of being part of something bigger than herself. She'd spent her whole life looking for this and never believing she'd find it. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind her. Caleb appeared, carrying a blanket. He draped it over her shoulders without a word, then stood beside her. "Hell of a meal," he said. "It was a team effort." "You always say that, like you're not the reason it all works." Mara leaned into him, letting herself accept the comfort of his presence. "I'm not the reason. I'm just part of it. You're the heart of it. There's a difference." They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars. Then Caleb said, "I've been thinking." "About?" "About the future. About what we're building here." Mara's heart started beating faster. And I want you to be part of it, not just as the cook, as more." She turned to look at him. His expression was serious, vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. "What are you asking me, Caleb?" "I'm asking if you'd consider staying, permanently, as my partner, in all of this." Mara's breath caught. "Your partner? In the ranch? In life? In everything?" He took her hand. "I know we haven't known each other that long. I know this is probably too soon, but I also know I don't want to do this without you. Any of it." Mara looked at him, this hard, complicated man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd stood by her when it would have been easier to let her go, who'd built her a kitchen and hired her assistants and believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. "Yes," she said. "Yes? Yes. I'll stay. I'll be your partner in all of it." Caleb pulled her into a kiss that was warm despite the cold, gentle despite the roughness of his hands. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We're going to have to tell the men," Mara said. "They already know. They suspect. That's different than knowing." "Then we'll make it official, tomorrow. Tonight, I just want to stand here with you." So they did. They stood together under the stars, wrapped in a shared blanket, and watched their breath make clouds in the cold air. And for the first time in her life, Mara felt complete. Winter deepened. January brought blizzards that buried the ranch under drifts so high they had to dig paths between buildings. February was somehow colder, with winds that cut through layers of clothing like they weren't there. But inside the cookhouse, it was warm. Mara, Clara, and Tommy worked through it all, keeping the men fed and the kitchen running. They developed new recipes, experimented with preservation techniques, found ways to make the dwindling supplies stretch further. And when a particularly bad storm trapped them all inside for 3 days, Mara organized the kitchen to run shifts. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner served in waves, so the cookhouse never got too crowded. The men appreciated it, and several of them commented that being trapped inside was almost bearable when the food was this good. In March, when the snow finally started to melt, Caleb made the announcement official. He gathered the crew in front of the main house and told them that he and Mara were together, that she'd be staying permanently, and that anyone who had a problem with it could find work elsewhere. No one left. A few of the men congratulated them. Most just nodded, unsurprised. Tommy grinned like he'd won a bet. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Mara moved some of her things into the main house. Not all of them. She still kept her room at the cookhouse. and she and Caleb figured out how to share space without stepping on each other's toes. It wasn't always smooth. They argued about money, about expansion plans, about whether to hire more hands in the spring. But they also learned how to compromise, how to listen, how to build something together that was stronger than either of them alone. The ranch prospered. Word spread about Mara's cooking, and when they put out a call for new hands in April, they had more applicants than they could hire. Several men mentioned the food specifically in their applications. "Heard you got the best cook in 3 territories," one of them said during his interview. "That true?" Caleb had smiled. "Best in 5 territories, maybe more." They hired 6 new men, which meant feeding 36 instead of 30. Mara didn't even blink. She just adjusted the recipes and kept going. Clara proved invaluable during the expansion. She had ideas about efficiency, about prep work, about systems that Mara hadn't considered. Together, they streamlined the operation until it ran like a well-oiled machine. Tommy, meanwhile, had grown into his role. He was no longer the clumsy kid fumbling through breakfast. He was a competent cook in his own right, capable of handling meals on his own when needed. One Sunday morning, Mara woke to find Tommy already in the kitchen, breakfast half prepared. She'd overslept, something that never happened, and had rushed to the cookhouse in a panic. "Relax," Tommy said when he saw her. "I've got this. Go back to bed." "I can't just—" "Yes, you can. You've been working yourself to death for months. Take a morning off. I promise I won't burn the place down." Mara wanted to argue, but looking at Tommy, confident, capable, completely in control, she realized she trusted him. "Okay," she said, "but if you need help, I'll yell. Now go." She went. And when she came back at noon, the kitchen was clean, the men were fed, and Tommy was grinning with pride. "Told you I had it," he said. "You did good, kid." "I'm not a kid anymore." Mara looked at him, this young man who'd grown so much in the months since she'd arrived, and smiled. "No, I guess you're not." Spring brought new challenges. A late frost killed some of the early crops, and a dispute with a neighboring ranch over water rights required delicate negotiation. But the ranch weathered it all, stronger and more stable than it had been in years. In May, Sarah came back to visit with her husband, a quiet man named James, who looked at her like she hung the moon. They stayed for dinner, and Sarah helped in the kitchen, showing off everything she'd learned. "You've gotten really good," Mara told her as they worked side by side. "I had a good teacher." Sarah paused, then added, "I'm pregnant, found out last week." Mara felt a rush of emotion, joy, pride, something maternal she'd never expected to feel. "Congratulations, that's wonderful." "I'm terrified." "That's normal." Was my ma terrified when she had me? Mara thought about it. "Probably, but she did it anyway, and you will too." Sarah smiled. "When the baby comes, I want you to teach me how to make proper baby food, not just mush, something with flavor." "I can do that." As she watched Sarah leave that evening, Mara realized she'd built something more than a kitchen. She'd built a legacy. She was passing on skills, knowledge, traditions. She was shaping the next generation in small but meaningful ways. It mattered. She mattered. And she'd never had to compromise who she was to earn it. Summer arrived with heat that rivaled the winter's cold in its intensity. The kitchen became an oven, and Mara, Clara, and Tommy developed a system of rotating through different tasks to keep anyone from overheating. They also started training 2 more assistants, young men who wanted to learn cooking as a trade. Mara was tough on them, demanding precision and consistency, but she was also fair. When they succeeded, she praised them. When they failed, she showed them how to do better. One of them, a kid named Marcus, reminded her of Tommy when he'd first started, eager but clumsy, full of questions. "Why does it matter if the carrots are cut the same size?" he asked one afternoon. "Because they need to cook evenly. If some are bigger than others, some will be raw while others are overcooked." "But does anyone really notice?" Mara fixed him with a look. "I notice. And if you want to work in my kitchen, you'll notice too. We don't do sloppy work here. We do it right, or we don't do it at all." Marcus nodded, chastened, and went back to cutting carrots with more attention. Later, Clara pulled Mara aside. "You're good with them, firm but not mean. They respect you." "I just hold them to the same standard I hold myself." "Exactly. You show them what's possible when you refuse to accept less than your best." Mara thought about that. She'd never considered herself a teacher, But that's what she'd become. Not just teaching techniques, but teaching values, work ethic, pride in what you do. She was shaping people, building them up instead of tearing them down. It was the opposite of everything she'd experienced, and it felt right. In August, Dale Chambers died of a heart attack. The news reached the ranch via a traveling merchant, and Caleb shared it with Mara that evening. "Does that change anything?" she asked. "No. His son's taking over the ranch, but he doesn't have his father's taste for conflict. We should be fine." "And Silas?" "Last I heard, he moved on, working for a ranch up north somewhere." Mara felt a weight lift that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The threat was truly over. She could stop looking over her shoulder. She was safe. That night, lying in bed beside Caleb, she said, "I want to expand the training program." "The what?" "The training for the assistants. I want to make it official. Teach anyone who wants to learn, not just people who work here. Turn the kitchen into a place where people can come to get skills that'll help them survive." Caleb propped himself up on one elbow, looking at her in the dim light. "You want to run a cooking school?" "Not a school, just a place where people can learn. The way I learned, by doing." "That's a school, Mara." "Fine, a school. Will you support it?" Caleb smiled. "Of course I will. Hell, I'll build you another building if you need it. Anything to see that look on your face." "What look?" "The one where you're planning something big. I love that look." Mara kissed him. "I love you." It was the first time she'd said it. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Caleb's expression softened. "I love you too. Have for a while now." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Wanted you to say it first. Needed to know you felt it too." They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd found each other against all odds, and built something neither of them had thought possible. By autumn, the training program was in full swing. Mara taught 3 sessions a week: basic cooking skills, preservation techniques, menu planning. She had students from neighboring ranches, from town, even a few women who traveled 2 days just to attend. She charged nothing for the lessons. Caleb had offered to let her charge tuition, but she'd refused. "Knowledge shouldn't cost money," she'd said. "These people need skills to survive. I'm not going to profit off that." So she taught for free, and word spread. More and more people came to learn from the woman who'd survived a frontier that tried to break her. Sarah came to several sessions, bringing other young wives from the surrounding area. They sat at Mara's tables and learned how to make bread, how to preserve vegetables, how to feed a family on almost nothing. And Mara taught them more than cooking. She taught them that strength wasn't about size or speed. It was about persistence, about getting up when you got knocked down, about refusing to let the world tell you what you were capable of. One evening, after a particularly good session, one of the students, a young woman named Beth, lingered. "Can I ask you something, Miss Vance?" "Of course. How did you keep going when everyone was against you?" Mara thought about it. "I didn't always keep going. There were times I wanted to quit, times I almost did. But I realized something important. The people who doubted me, they didn't know me. They were reacting to what they thought they saw, not who I actually was. And I couldn't let their ignorance define me. But it must have hurt. It did, every single time. But pain isn't permission to give up. It's just information. It tells you what needs to change, what needs to be protected, what's worth fighting for." Beth nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that, for being honest." After Beth left, Clara came out of the pantry where she'd been listening. "You're changing lives," she said. "You know that, right?" "I'm just teaching people to cook." "No. You're teaching people that they're worth something, that they can survive. That's bigger than cooking." Mara didn't respond, but she thought about Clara's words long into the night. Winter came again, the second one since Mara had arrived at the ranch. But this time, she wasn't alone in the cold. She had Clara and Tommy and the assistants. She had Caleb. She had a purpose that went beyond just survival. She had a life. On Christmas Eve, they held another feast. This one was bigger, with more food and more people. They'd invited neighbors, friends from town, anyone who wanted to come. The cookhouse was packed. People sat shoulder to shoulder at the tables, talking and laughing and eating. Children ran between the adults, excited by the celebration. The air was thick with the smell of roast beef and fresh bread and pies cooling on every available surface. Mara stood in the kitchen, watching it all, and felt a profound sense of completion. She'd done it. She'd built something that mattered, something that would outlast her. Caleb found her there, pulled her aside. "Come with me. I want to show you something." They walked through the snow to a spot behind the main house. There, illuminated by moonlight, was a sign. Vance Culinary Training Center. Mara stared at it. "Caleb, what is this?" "Your Christmas present. I'm building you a proper school. Dedicated space with multiple kitchens, dormitories for students who come from far away, everything you need to teach on a bigger scale." "This is too much." "It's not enough. You've changed this ranch, Mara. You've changed the community. You deserve a place that reflects that." Mara felt tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep doing what you're doing. Keep teaching, keep fighting, keep showing people what's possible." "I will, I promise." They stood together in the cold, looking at the sign that represented a future Mara had never dared to dream of. And she realized something important. She'd started this journey looking for acceptance, for a place to belong. But what she'd found was so much more. She'd found purpose, community, love. She'd found herself. The construction on the training center began in early spring and was completed by summer. It was bigger than Mara had imagined. 3 full kitchens, a classroom space, dormitories that could house 20 students at a time. The opening ceremony was attended by over 100 people. The territorial governor sent a letter of commendation. A newspaper from the nearest city wrote an article about the woman who was revolutionizing frontier cooking education. Mara stood in front of the crowd and gave a short speech. "I'm not good with words," she began. "I'm better with food. But I'll say this. For most of my life, I was told I didn't belong, that I was too much or not enough, that I should make myself smaller, quieter, less. And I tried. I tried so hard to fit into spaces that were never meant for me, but fitting in meant giving up parts of myself. And I wasn't willing to do that anymore. So I stopped trying to fit in and started building something new. A place where people like me could exist without apology. This center represents that belief, that everyone deserves a chance to learn, to grow, to become who they're meant to be. Thank you for believing in this vision. Thank you for being here." The crowd erupted in applause. Mara stepped down from the podium and was immediately surrounded by students, friends, supporters. Tommy grabbed her in a hug. "You did it, boss. You really did it." "We did it," Mara corrected. "All of us." Clara was crying, which made Mara cry, which made them both laugh through the tears. And Caleb stood back, watching with an expression of pure pride. That evening, after everyone had left, Mara and Caleb sat on the porch of the main house and watched the sunset. "How does it feel?" Caleb asked. "Surreal. Like I'm going to wake up and realize it was all a dream." "It's real. You made it real." Mara leaned against him. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe it would have been harder. But you would have done it, because that's who you are." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned orange and pink and purple. "What happens now?" Mara asked. "Now you teach, you build, you keep changing lives. And you?" "I'll be right here, supporting you, loving you, watching you do impossible things, and pretending I'm not amazed every single time." Mara smiled. "Sounds perfect." The years that followed were full and rich. The training center flourished, attracting students from across the territory and beyond. Mara taught hundreds of people, men and women, young and old, everyone who wanted to learn. Some of her students went on to open their own restaurants. Others became cooks on ranches, in mining camps, in settlements along the frontier. They carried her techniques with them, spreading her philosophy of cooking as an act of respect and dignity. Tommy eventually took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch kitchen, freeing Mara to focus more on teaching. Clara became the head of the training center's preservation program, teaching people how to make food last through harsh winters. Sarah's daughter grew up eating food prepared with techniques Mara had taught. When the girl was old enough, she became one of Mara's students, carrying the legacy into a third generation. And through it all, Mara and Caleb built a life together. They argued and laughed and supported each other through challenges neither could have faced alone. They expanded the ranch, added cattle, bought neighboring land. They became pillars of the community, known for their fairness and their commitment to helping others succeed. But Mara never forgot where she'd come from. She never forgot what it felt like to be dismissed, underestimated, pushed aside. And she made sure that anyone who walked through the doors of her training center knew they had value, regardless of what the world had told them. One evening, 15 years after she'd first arrived at Red Hollow, Mara stood in the training center kitchen and looked around at the students working at their stations. She saw a young woman who'd been told she was too fragile for frontier life, now confidently butchering a chicken. She saw a man who'd lost everything in a fire, learning to rebuild his life one recipe at a time. She saw a teenager who'd been orphaned, finding family in the community of students. She saw herself in all of them, and she realized that this collection of broken people learning to be whole again, this was her legacy. Not the building, not the reputation, not even the food. It was the people. The lives changed, the possibilities opened. Caleb found her there, as he often did, and put his arm around her waist. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked. "Just reflecting on how far we've come." "You've come. I just provided the space. You provided a lot more than space. You provided belief when I didn't have any." That goes both ways. They stood together, watching the students work, and Mara felt a profound sense of peace. She'd spent her whole life fighting to prove she belonged somewhere, fighting to show she was capable, fighting to earn respect she should have been given freely. But the fighting had made her strong. The rejection had made her determined. The doubt had made her unstoppable. She'd redefined what strength looked like on the frontier. Not violence or domination, but persistence. Not force, but consistency. Not proving others wrong, but proving yourself right. She'd shown that you could be soft and strong, that you could be dismissed and still matter, that you could be underestimated and still change the world. And in doing so, she'd created something that would outlast her. A place where others could learn the same lessons, where they could find the same strength, where they could learn that belonging wasn't something you waited for someone to give you. It was something you built for yourself. As the sun set on another day, Mara looked at the life she'd created and smiled. She'd come to Red Hollow with nothing but a trunk and a cast iron skillet, expecting to fail. Instead, she'd built an empire, not of land or money, but of people and purpose and possibility. And that, she thought, was more than enough. That was everything.